Okay, I think we should get started. Okay. Thank you everyone for joining us today for capital projects and business continuation during COVID-19. I'm Jessica Vale, President of Vale Marketing Solutions, and I will be the moderator for today's panel presentation. We have an awesome lineup of guest speakers and a very insightful and very relevant panel discussion today that most property managers and board members and community associations alike are facing in the midst of this pandemic. We encourage you to ask questions, which we will address at the end of the panel discussion. Should you have a question, please type it into the chat bar. And for those requiring CMCA designation, please send me a quick email, jessica@valemarketingsolutions.com, so I can make sure you get credit for today's session. And I will put my email address in the chat bar again at the end of the presentation. So our speakers today are Carrie Fusella of Design Alternatives, Jim Rademacher and Lauren Badene of ResCom, Mohammed Selyani of Wilkin and Gutton Plan, Tana Buka of Becker and Polikoff, and Jessica Marvel of National Cooperative Bank. The issue we are addressing is many community association boards are scared to use their reserves for upcoming budgeted projects due to fear of COVID-related financial fallout and potential lawsuits. What happens in this situation? What options are available for boards and community associations? How can we, the business partners, become a resource for community managers to help them navigate capital projects and business continuation during this time? We're going to start with Carrie Fusella of Design Alternatives. Let me just get this presentation up. So Carrie, what are the benefits of doing a clubhouse, or benefits of doing projects during the closure of a clubhouse or facility space? Carrie?
Thank you very much for introducing me. I am Carrie with Design Alternatives, and thank you for allowing us to be on this panel, which is going to be very effective today. And we all know how difficult it has been for all of these communities during these closures and what they can and can't do during that time that they have to tell their residents that they can't use their space. So what we want to do is turn around and say, what is the solution during this closure, and what are some of the benefits that we can do during this time? And so one of the things that we have, by the way, Design Alternatives is a firm that does a full service. We'll do the design, we'll do the renovation, we'll do the purchasing of the materials, we'll manage the project, and we'll go from start to finish. So if you have a project in your building, we would be able to handle that. So again, when we go to what are the benefits are now we do have a clubhouse, whether it's unfortunate or not, that's closed, but now we can do a project much faster. Projects are done much faster now because we don't have so many interruptions. I'm still on the prior slide, Jessica. We don't have all the interruptions with the fact that residents are coming in, or subcontractors now have to work. Some have to work nights, some have to work days. We have to move them all around. Many times we do a project and we have a lot of equipment. We have scaffolds, we have, dangerous things in the building. So if we knew that we had a building that was empty, or a room or an area, that would make this project go faster. Every time we have a building that they can close part of it down, we get the project done more efficiently and we get it done faster. And then the safety of the residents is always so important. When we don't have to worry about the residents milling around, in your building, everybody knows they want to see what's going on, what colors here, what are they doing, what's the flooring, oh my God, what are you putting in there, I have to see. Now we don't have the residents trying to get through the space that we have tools and equipment and workers in. So safety of the residents becomes very, very easy to provide. We don't have them in the building, they can't come in. So that's a big benefit to doing a project while you're closed. That absolutely gives us much fewer interruptions. So with fewer interruptions, we're able to work again much more efficiency. And then the logistics of all of the community activities. We can't tell you how many meetings we have. Where are the women and men going to play cards? Where are they going to shoot pool? What's going to happen? We have a competition with pool players. We can't close it down for 8 weeks. What's going to happen in our ballroom? Our ballroom has projects for months and months and months, and events, and what do we do? So we have logistics that really take a lot of time, and we want to have to move people. Okay, you go over here, this committee goes here, this committee now can't come to the building, the ballroom can't be used because there's exercise, the exercise room can't be used because that's being renovated, and then we don't want to exercise in a room that doesn't have equipment. So just the logistics of doing all of the different communities, clubs, and all the events becomes much easier, because now we closed, we get the job done, we do the room, we go in, and it's completed, and we don't have to put residents out and make them more resentful and more angry because they're not able to do that. We now can manage the project a lot easier. We're not managing residents, we're not managing committees, we're not managing the people that are surrounding us. The subcontractors can come in, they can work fluently because they have a task, they have an area, and they know who starts first, second, and third, because the building now is building, room, area, whichever it may be, is kind of closed, and therefore we can kind of speed it along. We can stage the materials. Many times we waste days because we have to stage things from one side of the building, close it, then take that side, do it, take another side, get the other side done. So again, we can get these projects done a lot faster. And what better product can we give to these communities that they're closed 6 months, 8 months, 9 months? And here we can now give them a beautiful new space. They've been closed all this time. They don't want to come back in and have a space have to be closed again. Now they can come in. They have new flooring, new furniture, new wall finishes, new lighting. Maybe we do, now is the time to start with our space planning. How do we add things for social distancing? What do we do about hands-free products? Now is the time to be able to plan those kind of things. And that's the benefit of closing down. We now have the ability to really look at this space and see what we can do to improve the functionality, to improve the safety, and improve the overall appearance of the building. So when they come back, they're happy.
Right. I totally agree, Carrie. Let me go to the previous slide. Okay, so what issues are you facing with associations that are not willing to spend money on budgeted capital projects?
Well, you know, the issues right now are large, and we all know that everybody had to put everything on hold. We know that. We empathize with that. There is not one community that didn't just go, oh my God, stop, right? But one of the things that happens is we do projects that can take a very long time. We start projects a lot of times a year in advance. So we had a lot of projects that we started last year that were scheduled for this year. And the unfortunate part about it is some of the delays could not be helped, of course. But now if we can get back on track, the delays that we're going to see is materials. The materials that we all need to get for these projects are delayed. They're back ordered. The factories, if you remember, are also closed. Many of the factories had to close for long amounts of times due to COVID, or they would reopen again. And all of a sudden they called us and said, we're closed. We had 2 cases of COVID. So now your chairs or your carpet or your flooring is going to now be an extra 3 to 4 weeks. So we have projects delays. The expenses are going to go up. If you price something in 2019, now all of a sudden you're going to do the project in 2021, you're going to have added expenses. The costs have gone up, materials may have longer lead times, and now we're reading the boom in the housing market is causing prices to go crazy. Lumber, we just read over the weekend, is soaring 20 to 30%. So there are going to be setbacks with getting materials now. Many commercial properties properties during this closing of the COVID were very slow because everybody was hold, I can't come in, where the housing industry went a little crazy. So now all of these builders are buying up all these materials. So we're going to have some setbacks by getting materials. You know, we don't want to substitute materials that we've had design team, board members, and managers all pick for months. Now we have to come back, and now we're going to be starting to saying, well, we can't get that because it's going to take too long. And if we want our project to come in on time, we've got to now substitute material. So that's always difficult. And of course, we have to reprice everything. Everything has to be repriced. If you start a job, give a job a budget, now you got to change the budget. And I have to say, one of the things that is disconcerting to us is we're getting from our manufacturers where we used to get a quote, and the quote would say, this is good for 30 days or 60 days. Now they're sending us quotes that are saying, this is good for 15 days. That's it. I mean, because things are changing on a daily basis. So that right there is one of the issues that we are facing. So getting materials, price increases, and longer lead time. So it's going to delay projects.
What reasons have been given by these associations as why they do not wish to move forward with a planned project?
Well, the biggest reason that everyone has been putting their projects on hold is fear, and rightfully so. I mean, everybody has been fearful. What is going to come out of this? You know, we still don't have answers for a lot of the problems. So many of our clients and many of the managers and board members have been saying, oh, I don't want to do anything. I don't know what's going to happen. What if we get potential lawsuits? What if we get legal fees? You know, how do we deal with that? Where does that money come from? I believe capital projects need to, come from capital money, but they don't know. Nobody has had to go through a pandemic during this time, so they're full of fear. And they need to be educated on what is the best way to be able to deal with things one at a time. How do I deal with my capital projects? How do I deal if I get a legal fee? What do I do if I now have to implement new cleaning codes and new excessive codes that I'm going to need to open my building? What am I going to do? So those are fears. And the other last thing that we've gotten a lot of pushback on is that there are residents now that want their money back. They want HOA money back. I can't use my community, so I don't want to pay the money, even though we all know as business vendors that we have to continue to put money into, or the communities have to continue to put money into the reserves because these projects continue whether they're using the clubhouse or not. So those are some of the fears and some of the unknowns that and the trials that everybody is going through, and that kind of puts them in a frozen mode. So, to educate all of us on what we can and can't do during this COVID is the goal here today. And we're hoping that we can teach them to be able to move forward and use some of the things that we think are very detrimental, and we're trying to find them to turn them into a benefit and a solution. That's the goal today. How can we turn all of this anxiety and all of this problems, how can we turn it into solutions? Thank you.
Thank you, Carrie. So we're going to chat with Jim and Lauren from ResCom. So Jim and Lauren, what kind of changes have you seen associations making regarding their spending for services and projects?
Thanks, Jess. So just to introduce ourselves real quick, my name is Lauren Badney, and I'm the Director of Business Development for ResCom. And Jim Rademacher is on with me as well. He is the owner and CEO. And we specialize in condo maintenance and janitorial services, as well as carpentry projects. So in addition to the insight that Carrie has just given about some capital projects, we're going to talk a little bit about the day-to-day maintenance and the things that we've seen with that so far. So overall, I think most of the communities, everyone's kind of had their own game plan based on their community and their needs. But throughout the start of this back in March, initially, as we all know, most people shut everything down. We expected this to be, a few weeks and try to figure everything out on the other side. So there was a lot of closing of amenities, requests for increased cleaning, stocking up on supplies, which were hard to get a hold of, things like that. Then around April to early May, there was a lot of uncertainty about how do we open, can we open, and what do we need to do? And so things kind of halted in that respect. All those cleanings cut back because now it was looking like we were unsure of exactly when things were going to open again. Then, as anyone who has a pool at their community remembers, May to June was a lot of frantic calls of the announcement that pools could open with kind of uncertain guidelines and restrictions from the state of New Jersey. And there was a lot of requests for adding additional staff. And to Carrie's point before, again, the associations are looking at this as more money we have to spend that was not budgeted for. And how are we going to do that to have pool ambassadors and have spacing out our pool furniture or eliminating that? So it was just a lot of conversation around that. And then when it realized it wasn't feasible for most pools or amenities to reopen again, that's where we're kind of at right now, where communities are starting to re-engage. They realize we're probably not opening at least through the end of this year. And how do we catch up on some of these things that were delayed or stalled all these months so far? So we do see some communities getting back into some maybe smaller projects or starting to gear up for some of those larger projects again, which is positive.
So what happens if you put off a project or regular maintenance service for too long?
Well, I think you run the risk of a few different things, and the first would be a safety issue could be occurring. So if there is a project on the calendar, there's good reason for that. Whether it might be a concrete replacement where you could avoid trips and falls. So safety issues are certainly one of the priorities. The potential for additional damage is the second thing that comes into play. So if you put these projects off and they're already being put on the calendar because the useful life has expired, now you could have anything from on a roof project, additional damage to the insulation or the framing members. And then of course that leads to our third item, which is the increased costs. So getting these projects done in a timely fashion, despite the current situation is certainly advisable. And I think everybody on this panel agrees. And then limited availability for scheduling is the final thing. If these projects get delayed, what's going to happen come spring of 2021, if things start to lift, everyone's going to be rushing to move forward with projects and enter into agreements with the same contractors. And it's going to be near impossible to get some of the projects done. So those would be my, main points on the risk for delaying.
So what recommendations do you have for associations with amenities that are closed in order to stay on top of their maintenance schedules and project schedules?
Well, I would say that the most important thing is to maintain relationships with your current service providers or business partners. You want to communicate with them about your concerns and put together a beneficial plan for both parties. Some associations immediately cease services with different business partners, and there's other ways to get around that so that you can maintain your relationships. So what we say next is get creative, and what we mean by that is take a look at the current contract and see what you can do to possibly repurpose your staff. And just to give you some examples, there's plenty of things to do on a site when it comes to daily maintenance. So if you had porters working in the clubhouse and the clubhouse is now closed, you're not going to continuously keep cleaning the clubhouse. So what you might do is repurpose those folks to do some drainage cleaning, some minor repairs on the exterior of the community. And of course, those would have to be approved by the vendor to make sure that everybody was staying safe. And then we get into, will you need assistance and stability when you get ready to open? So if you've terminated your agreement with your current service provider, they may not be there when it's time to reopen, because what they're going to do is they're going to send their staff to another community, and they're going to try to keep them working 40 hours a week. So again, it goes back to keeping those relationships. By keeping them and maybe reworking or being creative with the current contract, you can avoid unnecessary increased expenses. So if you terminate your contracts now and then you go back out to bid when things reopen, everybody's prices are going to be different than they are today. So that's consistent with projects or service contracts. And then the consistency and reliability in the event of emergency is the number one priority. We just saw it happen with the past storm that rolled through, and communities that didn't have their relationships were really struggling to get people to do things like fire watch, maybe make the changes for the new state requirements or the CDC recommendations, because the residents and board members are not going to do that. You're going to need your service providers to step up. So again, it goes back to relationships.
Yeah, and in addition to that, a huge recommendation we have is to, as a manager, a board member, a committee member, whatever your position in your community is, you want to showcase to your residents how the funds are being spent. Because as Carrie touched on, I know that Mohammed and Tana will talk on during their presentation, there's definitely people that are looking for refunds or for credits, or certainly not expecting any kind of increase in their HOA fees next year. Of course, you know, absolutely those communities that have large clubhouses and a lot of amenities that people are accustomed to using, they think, oh, well, everything's closed, you know, we should be getting money back, we shouldn't see an increase. And we know that's just not in the best interest of everybody. So the best thing you can do, and we've seen some great examples of that at some of our communities, is to send out regular e-blast or newsletters, or however you communicate to your homeowners about what is being done, some things that they may not be seeing behind the scenes. Are you working on an interior renovation for your clubhouse while this is all going on? Are you doing a large HVAC project? Are you doing paving throughout the community? Whatever that might be, make sure you're reminding them on a regular basis about that, and that'll make them realize, like, oh, okay, we are still spending money even though certain things are not available to us right now. The other items, some of the things that are not so obvious, I think, are your curb appeal. I think a lot of communities have kind of focused on the large projects like we're talking about, but those small things that may not normally be able to get accomplished during the busy season right now, things like painting your curb lines and adding new planters to the front of the community and changing out your signage. Those are all things that everyone can see every day when they drive the community and feel good about some refreshing that's happening there. So definitely don't be afraid to showcase that. And yeah, just difficult to schedule projects was the last thing that we had. And I think we've talked about that a lot. Again, it makes, although it's unfortunate that these areas are closed to the public right now, it does make it a lot easier to get through some of those projects more quickly, given this time right now.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you, Lauren. Next, we're going to chat with Mohammed Salyani from Wilkin and Gutton Plan. So Mohammed, what happens when a community board uses reserve funds for something other than the budgeted items?
Thanks, Jesse. First of all, my name, as Jesse said, my name is Mohammed Salyani. I'm from Wilkin Gun Plan. I'm a principal there. Been there for end of this year is going to be 20 years. And community associations, this is basically what I live and breathe as far as their finances are concerned. So that's a great question. You know, associations actually use their reserve funds for other things more often than you imagine. If you pick up your financial statements, your audited financial statements, and you go and you look at the balance sheet, and if you see a number that's called interfund balances, that means you're already borrowing from your reserves. Well, it could go either way. If you're seeing a positive number in the column that says replacement fund, then you are borrowing from your replacement from your reserves. And if you see a negative number, that means there's more cash in there than compared to the fund balance. But unfortunately, you're not really technically supposed to do that. And we'll talk about that relating to the IRS a little bit later. But interfund balances and borrowing from reserves does happen. If it can be done, if it's on a temporary basis and by the end of the year you can pay it back, then that's really the best way to do it, because timing differences do happen. But if an association is in a position where they have no choice and they have certain other expenses that they have incurred, and they don't have the funds to be able to pay for it, like for example, the storm that we just had, as Jim mentioned, and you've now had a lot of damage and you need to have, you need funds to pay for the repairs, then if you're going to have to borrow from your reserves, the first thing is you need to make sure that you have a plan. You document the plan, you discuss it and you approve it in the minutes, so that it's attached there. And in the plan, you have a payback plan to how to pay the money back, and you follow that and make sure that if it's going to be a long-term payback period, then even if the board changes, the new board that comes in has the ability and knows what they need to do to follow the payback of that money, because it's extremely important to make sure that your reserves are well funded. Usually when associations are going through tough times, the easiest thing to do is to reduce your reserve funding, but all you're doing is you're creating problems for the future, because when you do need that money for those projects, you won't have it, and you would then have to turn back to your unit owners or to your homeowners and have a special assessment or deal with it in a different way. So if you're going to have to borrow from your reserves, it's imperative that you have a plan and you follow that plan.
So what is the financial impact of delaying capital projects and business continuation?
So I know that Carrie, Jim, and Lauren all touched on this a little bit as they spoke, but it's obvious that, first of all, costs could increase. The reason for that is, first of all, as you just heard, some of the vendors are not even willing to go beyond 15 days as far as their prices are concerned, because they have no idea what's coming, what's going to happen in the future, what delays are going to happen, and what they're going to have to pay for the product that they are going to have to produce and provide to you. Like, for example, let's take a simple example of wipes, right? Today, there are basically no wipes on any shelf out there. If you try and go get wipes, you can't get them. And if you do manage to find them, the prices are what, 3 to 5 times more than what they were before. So it's a very simple example, but it's something that you got to think about, that if you're delaying your project, what's it going to cost you when you actually do the project? So that's the price of those the items that you're going to use for that project. Secondly, let's take the example of a roof replacement project. If you're delaying that project, what's the impact of not doing it now? Now, as Jim and Lauren mentioned, those projects have come up because they need to be done. That item has reached the end of its useful life. If you delay that project, now if that roof starts leaking, now you're talking about doing more work than was initially anticipated. And of course, that's going to cost you some more money. So from a financial point of view, if a project is up, it needs to be done, then delaying it is not really the answer. I know that there's a lot of uncertainty that we're facing right now, but if you have the money and you have to do a project, it's better to do it right now. And if you have an association that is funding its reserves through either what's known as threshold funding and baseline funding, and that's a whole different discussion about what those types of funding are. But basically, a quick explanation is threshold funding says that if you look at the cash flow of your reserves, it's never going to go below a certain predetermined threshold. And if you do baseline funding, then that lowest point in your cash flow is actually down to 0. Now, it's a risky way of funding. It's an acceptable way of funding, but it is risky. And if you decide that you're going to now delay a project and it ends up costing you more than what you anticipated, and you have other projects that are coming up, now you don't have the money to be able to pay for everything. So now you're in a different situation altogether. So delaying projects at this point in time really is not the answer and not the solution to the issues that the associations are facing right now.
So I know you touched on this before, but can you explain what the IRS rules are?
Okay, so yeah, associations, contrary to what a lot of people believe, for federal purposes, are not-for-profit organizations. They do pay taxes, and they're in New Jersey, they're incorporated under Title 15A, which means that they don't pay state taxes, but they pay federal taxes. However, the IRS does recognize that there are certain things that an association is not doing. Even though they are incorporated as a corporation, they're not out there to make a profit. So there's the regular corporate business tax return, the 1120. An association can file that, or can file what's known as an 1120H. Which is for a condominium management or a homeowner association or a timeshare association. So what's the difference between the two? One of the main differences is that the 1120H is a simpler return. It's a one-page return. However, there are certain criteria that you have to meet. There's certain percentages of your revenue and your expenses that you need to show that are going towards the regular day-to-day operations of your associations. If you don't meet that criteria, technically you cannot file an 1120H. Secondly, what might not be taxable under an 1120 may be taxable under a 1120H. So for example, under an 1120H, and I know that's not happening right now because of COVID, but if you rent out your clubhouse to a unit owner for a birthday party or something else, that is considered non-function income. It's not income to function the association or to make it function on a day-to-day basis. So it is taxable. However, of course, there are expenses that you can offset against that, the maintenance and the caring of the clubhouse to offset against those expenses. And another point is that the 1120H is you pay a flat rate of 30% on an 1120H. So the tax return rate is higher than the 1120. The 1120 has now, with the new tax law that came out in 2018, also has a flat rate, but it's at 21%. So it's a lower rate. However, the disadvantage of filing an 1120 is that, first of all, it is a longer return, and it includes your balance sheet on the return itself. Now, why is that a disadvantage? Because the IRS knows that even though you're not here to make a profit, they do not accept that you're supposed to be putting money aside besides your reserves in any other fund, like your deferred maintenance, your inclement weather fund, your working capital. As far as they are in their consideration, all those are the operating fund. They all come together in one bucket. And as far as the IRS is concerned, you cannot carry forward surpluses from year to year. You're only allowed to do that for 1 year, and then you have to utilize all your surpluses in the next year, or they may be subject to tax. And then if you are doing filing an 1120, the money that you put aside in your replacement fund or your reserves, there are certain guidelines that you have to follow. First of all, the money that's set aside has to be in a bank account that is named reserves or replacement fund or capital fund, so that you can know that that's a separate bank account. Secondly, it needs to be based on a certain plan, which is usually the study that's done by the engineer. You need to follow that study. And thirdly, it needs to be funded through the budget process. So you can't think that, okay, we're going to have the reserves, we're going to have the bank account that's named reserves, we'll have the money in there, and if we have surpluses in our operating account, we'll just transfer them. technically you're not allowed to do that. The money that goes into reserves has to be funded through the budget and based on a plan, which is the study.
So I know we also touched on this earlier in the presentation, but again, why are refunds not a good idea?
Yeah. When is it ever a good idea to give back money, right? So at this point, we have no idea what the future holds. We don't know when these clubhouses are going to open, how they're going to open, what the situation is going to be. We have no idea what the future holds. Why would you want to give back money when you don't know what it's going to cost you when things start to return to normal, although who knows what normal is going to be going forward anyway. So and then the other thing is that as Lauren and Jim already mentioned, there are these costs that you're incurring. As I mentioned, you know, the wipes now cost 5 to 5 times more than what they cost before, and you're doing a lot more cleaning, especially if you have an association that's a high-rise or a medium-rise building and you have areas, hallways and lobbies and elevators that you're using. The amount of cleaning that you're doing there to make sure that they stay safe is unbelievable. So all those costs that you're incurring, that money's got to come from somewhere. And when you do open, and then you, although Jim mentioned, you know, that not to cancel your contracts, but unfortunately there are some associations that are doing that. They're you know, there's a reaction that's happening right now, and they're deciding, oh, we don't need this contract and we don't need that contract, so we're going to cancel them. And then when you do manage to open, and now you're scrambling to go out there and find vendors, and first of all, they might not have the time, and if they do have the time, the prices they're going to quote are most likely going to be very different than what you had previously. So the costs to open up are unknown at this time. There are definitely other solutions to giving refunds. One is you can suggest to your association, to your you know, unit owners or homeowners, is that maybe next year you might give them a credit to a certain thing. Like, for example, if the pool hasn't opened, there might be a credit to your pool passes next year. That's a possibility. The other thing is that if you are in that situation where your reserves are underfunded, or you have borrowed from your reserves and you have the money, then isn't this a time for you to pay back that money so that you don't have to go back to your unit owners later on and ask them for more money, especially since they've been through this situation and a lot of them may have lost their jobs or being in a difficult situation. And currently, although we may not have seen it right now, but it might happen in the future. As this continues, your delinquencies may go up. So if your delinquencies go up, then now you're going to be facing a cash flow issue. And if you're going to start talking about refunds and your delinquencies are rising, you're going to need the money from somewhere. So you need to look at what your current financial situation is, where your reserves are. Do you need that money for any projects that you might have to do in the near future? I would suggest using those funds there rather than giving it back to anybody.
Thank you, Mohammed. Next, we're going to chat with Jessica Marvel from NCB, National Cooperative Bank. So Jess, what trends are you noticing in communities during this time in regard to lending?
Thanks, Jess. So my name's Jessica from National Cooperative Bank. In the beginning, when the pandemic first hit, everything kind of came to a screeching halt. We didn't see a lot of projects being completed, and I think everyone was just trying to figure out, you know, what next. And now we're starting to see, probably the end of April, beginning of May, we started seeing some associations that were starting to think about their projects. They were kind of reprioritizing their capital plan and saying, okay, so I had planned to maybe do a roofing and a siding project this year. And now we're tending to see them focus on just trying to get one major project completed. So we're seeing smaller loan sizes, and they're figuring out, you know, what is essential for me to get done this year. So if you have leaking roofs, kind of like I believe Jim was talking about earlier, you want to get that taken care of because you will have damage. You'll have damage to the plywood underneath and it'll cost you more later on. So we see them, really prioritizing that capital plan and then figuring out, how are we going to fund this project? So if we had originally planned to fund this out of our reserve funds, the total project, if you had a $1 million roof project, and you were going to fund it out of your reserves, the trend was now starting to say, okay, maybe I want to protect my cash on hand. And there's a saying that cash is king in time of economic turmoil. And just kind of as you relate it to your personal life as well, you kind of want to protect your savings because you don't know what's around the corner. I've also spent a lot of time doing scenario planning with managers and just looking at their current budgets and saying, okay, what happens if there was a reduction in income of 10%, 15%, 20%? What is the plan at that point? And also always just encouraging them to talk to, their attorneys and their accountants just to get another picture from another business partner as well.
So what types of loans are available?
So there's two types of loans that you can look at. One is a fixed, fully amortizing loan where you start paying principal and interest back the day that the loan closes. There are typically no fees associated with this. So this has always been probably about 90% of the loans that we do are fixed, fully amortizing. And the second is a draw to term, which is starting to get a little bit more interest at this point, where you have a draw period up to 24 months and you're paying interest only during that period. And then at the end of the draw period, it'll convert to your fixed, fully amortizing. And typically with the draw to term, there is a commitment fee involved, typically about a quarter or 3/4 of a point to a point of the loan amount. So there is some financial impact as well with that, but you're paying interest only during that draw period. So it allows, that type of loan to fit into a budget. So you don't have to do a special assessment right away. We're seeing a lot of associations as I'm talking to them, trying to figure out, how, if they're doing a smaller loan size, how can they fit, part of that debt service into their operating budget and then fund the other part out of reserve so they don't have to go to their membership for a special assessment. And then they do have their saving cash on hand if there was an uptick in delinquencies. We haven't seen a huge uptick in delinquencies for the associations as of now. And it depends on the makeup of the association, but we'll see what happens as we continue into the year. The available terms and interest rates. So we'll look at terms from 3 years to 5 years to 7 years, 10 years, all the way up to 15 years. It really depends on the association and what the best fit is for them. And kind of what their goals are too. I think it's important to remember that these loans, you can always prepay them with internal funds at any time without any penalty. So if you're an association and you do a 10-year loan and at year 5, you've protected your reserves, you weren't sure what's going to happen. And at year 5, you have enough money to pay off this loan, you can pay it off without any penalty and your loan will be before maturity. Interest rates. So these are business loans and it's unsecured debt. So what that means is we don't have any real estate attached to it. So if the association failed to pay, there isn't a building that we can go after. All we have is a lien on your assessments that are coming into the association. So it's more risky than if it's like a regular mortgage that we have on our homes due to the fact that there's no real estate attached to it. So rates are very good right now. They will be a little bit higher than your average mortgage rates right now just because of the unsecured debt.
So what are you looking for when you approve a loan, and what does good credit look like?
Sure. So one of the major factors is your delinquency ratio. So you always want to raise money before you actually need it. So you have that there sitting there to use for your projects. So for the delinquency ratio, we don't like to see it more than 10% of your annual budget, and then no more than 15% of your units. And the closer you get to that policy, the bank will start kind of digging into your historical financials. Did they have a delinquency project or problem 3 years ago? Did they write off a lot of bad debt? And then we'll also look at if you had, let's say, 8 units that were delinquent, maybe there's only 2 that carry like 95% of that delinquency. Then there's a story to be told because we know that then you're looking at those to force foreclosures and to get unit owners in there that are actually paying. So for us, when we see something like that, it's not a terrible thing. We know that the association is working to then get somebody in there that's going to pay those fees. The second is your rental ratio. We typically don't like to see it more than 30% unless you're in a large city area, and that'll be up to 50%. And the reason is that we want to make sure that the investors are behind the projects that you're doing, because investors are there to make money. So if they have to have an increase for debt service, and that's hitting their bottom line. And a lot of times, if you have a higher rental ratio, we'll ask for a vote of the membership. And we'll want to see, are they backing the project? And we'll also want to know, what is the feeling at those meetings, at those membership meetings? There's always going to have, no one's always going to agree on the right move. But we want to make sure that the majority of the community is behind the project. Next, we look at your maintenance fee comparison to your neighborhood. We want to make sure that the increase for the debt service or what you're currently paying isn't going to price you out of the community, because the bank wants to know that people are still going to want to buy in there and they're going to be able to afford it. Loan to value, we don't like to see that more than 15% of your loan to the value of your homes in your community. We talked about investor ratio, the size of the maintenance increase. So we don't like to see it more than 45% increase. So when we're looking at a financial spread for your community, and we see that the association only has to increase their maintenance fees by 15% for a 10-year term loan, that to us is a good credit. As you start to get to like the 40%, 45%, and you're almost doubling your condo fee, we start to wonder, can the membership actually handle that? Are they going to be able to remit that? Or are we going to start seeing a huge uptick in delinquencies? And then one of the most important ones is the reserve requirements over the term of the loan. So we want to make sure, capital projects increase the value of your community. So if you're taking a loan for the roof project and you have the siding needs to be replaced, let's say at year 3 of the loan, we want to make sure that the funds are there to do that. Or, you're able to come back and borrow additional money if you're a good credit, but we want to make sure that those projects are completed, the essential projects.
Thank you, Jess.
Sure.
Now we're going to shift gears here and chat with Tana Buca from Becker and Polikoff. Tana, can you explain the difference between reserve funds and operating funds?
Hi, Jess. Absolutely. First, thank you so much for allowing me to join this call, for having me here with all these wonderful speakers. I think this is a very important and timely topic. As you mentioned, my name is Tana Buca. I'm a shareholder at the firm of Becker and Polikoff, and my focus is on representing community associations. So the difference between reserve funds and operating funds is likely pretty clear to everyone on this call and the managers, but sometimes it gets confusing for association board members. So reserve funds are assets that should be set aside by the association, which are specifically designated to meet the cost of anticipated and future expenditures, such as major repairs and improvements. Unlike operating funds, reserve funds should be segregated and placed in a separate account, which is dedicated to deferred maintenance costs, things like painting, and replacement costs for the common property, for example, replacing a roof. Associations should be required to keep reserve funds for non-routine repairs, such as swimming pool renovations, deferred maintenance items, painting, replacement items like the roof, when the useful life expires.
What are the legal ramifications of diverting funds or not allocating reserves properly?
This is a great question, Jess. I heard Carrie mention before, and Lauren talked about it some as well, that boards are really motivated by fear at this point in time. what they're allocated for. First and foremost, the association the board is opening the association up to liability from owners, claiming that the board breached some sort of obligation that they owed as trustees to the association. I'll give you a perfect example. The roof needs to be replaced. The board says, I'm concerned, I'm afraid about COVID, I don't know what our operating fund is gonna look like. And so I'm not going to replace the roof at this point in time because I wanna save those reserve funds, perhaps to use for something else. However, here's the issue. If the roof starts to leak, you're going to create additional damages in the interior of the building. And those damages are something that's going to be the responsibility of the association. So you're going to take a problem that might have cost you $100,000 that you had reserves for, and you're going to make that become a $200,000 problem. And so in addition to that, the association's board has fiduciary obligations to its homeowners, and among other things, they should be utilizing the funds for what they're designated for. So the board could, in theory, be opening itself up to a claim by homeowners that the board has actually breached its fiduciary obligations by not utilizing the reserves funds for what they are intended for.
So what is the association and board of trustees fiduciary duty?
So getting back to their major obligations with respect to the reserve funds, the board should be looking to their reserve study to determine what their reserve fund should be, and also when they should be replacing items. A fiduciary is someone who undertakes to act in the interest of another person or persons. Among other things, fiduciary duties include loyalty, acting for the sole benefit of a party that you represent. The board members or trustees, they were elected to represent to manage and oversee the operations of the association. Among other things, the association's responsible for the repair and maintenance and replacement of the reserve items. The board is not responsible, the board shouldn't be guided by what their personal concerns are in making decisions as a board member. They're not concerned about what I would do or what they would do as an individual person. They have to be concerned about what they would do for the benefit of the entire community. They have to act in accordance with the law. They have to act in accordance with the association's governing documents, which would be the master deed and bylaws for a condominium, or for a homeowners association, a declaration and bylaws. They have to maintain confidentiality, and they also have to act ethically. The board overall is responsible for ensuring that the association is maintaining and utilizing its reserve funding in accordance with its reserve study. So Mohammed touched on this earlier, borrowing from the association's reserve fund for other expenses. First, if the association is properly budgeted, which the board is responsible for overseeing, the board should not be borrowing from its reserve fund. Okay, and the board shouldn't be borrowing from its reserve fund for long-term expenses. All right, if they are borrowing from the reserve fund, as Mohammed mentioned, it should be paid back in that year. Also, something that Lauren mentioned earlier, this is the perfect time for associations to utilize their reserve funds to the extent it's time to make replacements and repairs. At this point, most associations' clubhouses are closed. Most associations have elected to keep their pool closed for the season. There's nobody in the clubhouse. This is the perfect time for the board to schedule carpet replacement, decorating, whatever is on the agenda for replacement, because there's no one in the clubhouse. And so homeowners, the biggest complaint that I see as counsel for association is they want a refund. They don't see that the clubhouse is being utilized. They see that the pool is being shut down, and they're asking for a refund. There's no understanding that there's carrying cost for all of those items. But it's much better to show the homeowners that you're actually taking their money and you're using it for something during this closure period. And so communicating with the homeowners, holding open board meetings, making the owners aware of what the board is doing, why we can't give refunds, and why we need to do these replacement projects at this time is really critical.
Great. Is that everything you wanted to cover, Tana?
Yes.
Okay, so thank you very much. Thank you everyone for attending. We are going to open it up right now for questions, Q&A. If anyone has a question, please type it in the chat bar and we can address it.